Hi, welcome back to our series on conflict management. I'm Lindley Craig and I'll be your guide today through this video session on conflict management and I Messages. Now, just to recap, what we've been through so far is we've established that we are looking for an increased area of rapport within our communication with other people. And we've identified that when somebody else owns a problem, sometimes that's going to affect us by taking away some of our time because people are trying to give us their own problems. So we learned some helping skills that allow people to own their own problem and for us to help them to solve the problem without taking ownership of it ourselves. Now we're on to the next phase where we're saying, okay, it's not the other person who owns the problem, it's actually me who owns the problem. So how do we deal with conflict when we're the ones who own the problem in the first place? All right, so let's get started. So we're learning about this problem management because of the fact that conflict management, because of the fact that it occurs in most of our daily lives. And we sometimes misinterpret the different types of skills that we can use to be able to overcome certain conflicts in our lives. So we're going to be teaching all of these different conflict skills so that you know which ones to use at which time. So we're also going to review today what iMessages are all about. So this iMessage, what does that actually mean? And then how do you use the iMessage in your own communication, as well as I'm going to give you a practice, and then your goal, of course, is to go out and do the practice and then determine what you notice from the practice. So when we are the ones who own the problem, we have 4 outcomes that we're really trying to get. We're really trying to make sure that these particular outcomes stay as our intentions of our communication, because that gives us the ability to get to that rapport level where we're expanding our level of rapport, expanding the number of communications that we have that are in rapport rather than outside rapport, i.e. somebody owns a problem or there's conflict. All right, so the first one is that we need to get change. So when we own a problem, we're actually trying to get someone to change or something to change. So it might be a behavior, it might be a behavior or a person, but it might be something that's going on within our organization. It might be a series of things. It might be the way somebody communicates to us. Those kinds of things. What we're trying to do is get the change to actually occur. So what else do we want to do and make sure that we have an intention before we start? Well, the next thing that we want to make sure of is that we're trying to get across to the person that we don't want similar circumstances to occur in the future. So whatever the problem it is that we have, we want to be able to state it to them, get them to change it, and to avoid having that particular thing come up again. All right, so what else? Well, the other thing is that we're trying to preserve rapport. Again, we're trying to expand the communication that we have with others to include rapport in almost all of the circumstances rather than conflict. So again, we're trying to get problem ownership, either our problems or their problems or whatever. We're trying to get those out to increase and expand our rapport. So preserving rapport is really important because, again, once we get back to rapport, there's no problems. And that's really less stressful. It's less, everybody has less issues about that. Everybody gets back to work. It's more productive. So it's really important. Let's see number 4. So number 4 is also something that when you're in conflict, some people have a little bit of a hard time with. So number 4 is about preserving the other person's self-respect. So this is why what we're working on is called an I message instead of a you message. So what we're trying to say is, as a presupposition of NLP, I know that a person and their behavior are not the same thing. So a person can be a really great person and have really lousy behavior at times. So just because they have a lousy behavior at times doesn't mean that they're a lousy person, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to say, you are a person and there's nothing wrong with you as the person, but what I don't like is the behavior. So that's what we're trying to do, and that's why we're trying to preserve this person's self-respect. All right, so I hope you understand that. All right, now let's go on to our the I messages and how exactly they're formed. All right, so what exactly is an I message? So the first element of an I message is that you have to have sensory specific behavior. Now, here's where the problem starts, because most people don't describe another person's behavior in sensory specific terms. What they do is describe it with a lot of adjectives and a lot of adverbs. So they'll say something like, you are such a silly person, you don't know how to do that properly. And basically what comes across is a bunch of judgments and a bunch of opinions about what we believe to be true. Now, how do we describe behavior with our senses? Let me give you an example. Say that I'm sitting here and I bring in my clipboard. Okay, so I'm sitting here with my clipboard, and if I were to ask you to describe my behavior in this element in just 2 seconds, if I ask you to describe my behavior, what would you say that I'm doing? So if I do, now, how would you describe that particular behavior? Would you have said I slammed my my notebook or my flip chart or my my little thing? Did I slam it on the table, or did I make a huffing sound or a puffing sound, or did I look annoyed? Did I roll my eyes? What specifically did I do, sensory speaking? Now, I have this little clipboard, and to be able to describe what I did sensory specifically, I would say when you had your clipboard, you placed it on the table, and when you placed it on the table, I heard a sound. Okay, so now I can place the clipboard on the table several times and it not make a sound at all. But when you say to somebody, you place this clipboard on the table and I heard it when it hit the table, then that's sensory specific. I heard something. It's a sense. Now, another thing that you can describe is when, after you put the clipboard on the table, Lindley, you folded your arms across your chest. Now, that's a sensory specific behavior. It's not that I got angry or I was annoyed or other things like that. I just folded my arms across my chest. Now, it's really important that when you look at things in the world and when you look at somebody else's behavior, you practice being able to state to them what the sensory specific behavior is without all of the judgments, without all the adjectives and adverbs that describe what you think the meaning behind the behavior is. So when I slammed my clipboard down, you might assume the meaning behind that is that I'm mad, or that I'm annoyed, or I'm frustrated. But there's no meaning there. The clipboard hit the table and there was a sound. That's sensory specific. Nothing more, nothing less. So this is the biggest challenge for most people in I messages, because it's really important to keep that sensory specific behavior just that, without anything more added to it. Specifically, no judgments. Now, the reason that we do this is because when we deliver our iMessage to someone else, we don't want them coming back and arguing with us about whether they slammed the clipboard down, whether they were huffing or puffing, whether they were angry, frustrated, whatever it was. Because the minute you place meaning on it, you are telling them the meaning of their behavior. And they're going to come back to you and tell you that's not what it means at all. So we're trying to avoid any of that conflict coming up by us describing it incorrectly. So describe it just as neutrally as possible. The clipboard hit the table, there was a sound. Ta-da! Finished. All right. So what's next? You can describe the concrete effects. Now, in concrete effects, not all the time are you going to be able to describe the fact that you have concrete effects. So if somebody comes late to one of my presentations, I can't necessarily say that there always is concrete effects. If there is, like for example, when you came late to, or when someone comes late to my presentation, I wait for them, and therefore I have to put a lot more information in a lot less time, and that's the concrete effect. So the concrete effect is not necessary that we say, here's the concrete effect of me, because sometimes there might not be one. And if you're not sure, it's best not to include it, only because of the fact that if you do include it and it's something that the other person can argue about, again, your iMessage is not going to get through. So let's look at the third part. The third part is the feeling state. So we're going to say back to the person about how we feel. Let's put it all together, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. All right, so the statement is, when sensory specific behavior happens, I feel something, and the result for me is this other stuff. Okay? Now, I know that's not very specific for you. So that's the general thing. So if you want to pause the video now, you can write that down, because this is the formula that we're going to use for iMessages throughout the rest of the conflict management video sessions. So when the sensory specific behavior happens, I feel, and the result for me is, so you're never saying you. It's all about, here's the behavior, when it happens, I feel this, and here's my result. Now, of course, you can not have that result at the end. That's perfectly fine. But can you hear the fact that this is an iMessage? This is about me. It's not about the other person. It's not about you did this and you're making me upset. We're not saying that. We're saying when the behavior occurs, it doesn't matter who does the behavior. When the behavior occurs, I feel a certain way. All right, let's look at some examples. All right, so these are actually examples of people have actually said something to me and I've responded this way. So when someone says to me, I'm stirring the pasta wrong, I feel frustrated. So now, I didn't say, hey, stop telling me how to stir the pasta. I know how to do it. That's not what I said. What I said was, when someone, it doesn't matter who it is, if it's my next door neighbor, if it's my husband, if it's a little dog, I don't care who it is, if someone says to me that I'm stirring the pasta wrong, I feel frustrated. You know, I went to culinary school. I know how to stir pasta. So I feel frustrated when somebody tries to correct me. So when someone says, I'm stirring the pasta wrong, I feel frustrated. Now, I'm not saying that there's concrete effects here. So I'm just leaving that one just like it is. Now, the next one, when someone walks across the floor in the apartment above me in a manner that is loud enough for me to hear it, I feel annoyed. I retyped the same paragraph in an email 4 times. This prevents me from working productively. So, can you see this in this example? For me, there was a concrete effect. the concrete effect was I had to rewrite something 4 times. So when I deliver this iMessage to someone, I don't care who it is that's making the noise. I don't care what caused the noise because I can't see it, it's above me. So I'm going to use as much sensory specific detail as possible. I know that it's walking because I can hear it moving, but I don't know if it's a child doing it, if it's a mother doing it, if it's the housekeeper doing it. I don't know who it is. All I know that number one, it's rapid, but the thing is I can't say when someone's running across the floor because they could argue with me about whether they were running or not. And I don't want them arguing with me about it. All I want to do is say, I hear somebody as they walk across the floor, and it's loud enough that it's distracting me from work. All right, so hope that makes sense to you. So it's when sensory specific, so the sensory specific detail, walk across the floor and it's loud enough for me to hear. Okay, so, and I didn't say anything about it's so loud. It's like an elephant walking across the floor. I didn't say that. That would be exaggeration. And somebody will argue with me about that. Surely, I promise that will happen. All right, so that is the formulation of the iMessage. Now, here's a very important element about how we deliver our iMessages, and it has to do with emotional temperature. So when we're delivering our iMessage to somebody else, the emotional temperature is going to rise up. So it looks like this. Emotional temperature, as we're delivering our iMessage, we're actually kind of making the other person feel unnatural, like we're not in rapport, because we're kind of telling them off. We're kind of telling them we don't like their behavior, but we're not actually saying it's their behavior, it's anybody's behavior. But they just are the ones who did it. They know that. So the emotional temperature goes up. Now, what happens after we have stated our case, we're going to reflect back what they tell back to us. So if someone says to me, when I deliver my iMessage, when someone says I'm stirring the pasta wrong, I feel frustrated. And that person says back to me, oh, I wasn't trying to tell you that you were doing it wrong. And I reflect, oh, so you weren't telling me that I was doing it wrong. And they say, yeah. And I'm like, okay, great. So when I do that, when I reflect back what they've said to me, then the emotional temperature goes back down again. Now, sometimes I might be in a situation where I have to restate my my iMessage. So somebody comes late to a program that I'm running, right? And I say, when someone comes late to the program, I have to delay the start of the program, and therefore we're not able to cover the same amount of material. And the person might say back to me something like, well, I didn't really realize that you were going to have to wait for me. And so I would say, okay, so you didn't realize I was waiting for you to show up. And they say, yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, in the future, I would like you to know that when I wait for people to show up so I can start the class, it means that we have to have less information or less content because I've waited for people to show up. It's really important for people to come on time. So that is how we keep the emotional temperature down, by reflecting back what the person is responding to our iMessage. Now, here's how you don't do it. You don't deliver an iMessage followed by another iMessage followed by another iMessage. So you don't say, I don't like this behavior. I feel bad about this behavior. Oh, and this other behavior, I don't like that either, and I feel bad about that. And I don't like this other behavior, and I feel bad about that. So we don't go 3 different cases of what we're upset about and deliver 3 different iMessages, because what's going to happen there is there's no ability for us to reflect. So one at a time, because the emotional temperature is going to keep rising every single time we are delivering content to somebody that's in iMessage format. Without that ability to reflect and to bring the emotional temperature back down, then basically things can go through the roof. So the rule with iMessages, one at a time, please. Okay. All right. So that's about the emotional temperature. Now, so how do you do this kind of thing? So I've kind of explained how it works by giving you a couple of demonstrations in sort of verbal, but I want to kind of try to give you a picture of what it looks like. So in NLP, we call this the two-step. So it's sort of a dance that we're doing about rapport. So when we start the two-step, the person, number one, the person who's delivering their iMessage, when they're delivering their iMessage, they start out in rapport before the iMessage comes out of their mouth. Okay, because the other person doesn't know that there's a problem yet, right? So that person thinks everything's fine. So when we deliver our iMessage, we automatically step out of rapport with that person. So it's like we're sidestepping to the side, away from them, as if we're like separating ourselves from them, and we're separating ourselves, and we're saying like, okay, we're out of rapport now. Now, that second person that other person is going to respond back to us. So number two, the person's going to respond back to us, and then when they do that, we're going to reflect whatever they said. Now, we're going to reflect that until they nod as if they're in agreement. Once they nod, then we basically come back together, back into rapport. So that is one way that this entire two-step process can happen. Now, the other way that this can happen is that I deliver my iMessage, and then when I deliver my iMessage, the second person comes back to me and says, well, I can't be on time because my babysitter showed up this morning late, and so therefore I was late this morning. And so when I reflect, they say what they said back. So your babysitter showed up, and so you were late. And they say yes. Then we have basically what we call a need conflict. So they need to wait until the babysitter arrives. There's a sound of a bell. So they wanted to wait until the babysitter arrived, and we want to start the program on time. So we have two different needs of being able to get the program going. So when we have a need conflict, we're going to go into a conflict resolution about needs. And that will be in our next session of the NLP Association. Now, in the third scenario, so the first scenario is we go back into rapport. The second scenario is there's a conflict and they are resisting because they have a different need than we do. And in the third one, we say, hey, when someone shows up late for the class, I end up waiting, and therefore the content has to be squished into less time. When that person can come back and say to us, well, it's my money, I can show up whenever I want to. So they don't value the fact that I have said what I've said. They're basically saying I have a different set of values, and my money is more important than your course. And I paid for it, so that's what I'm going to do. So basically now we are in a value conflict. So that's something that we're going to resolve in a different way. A different way than a need conflict, and a different way than obviously getting back into rapport. So in those last two scenarios, the need conflict as well as the value conflict, we're still in conflict. We don't do the second step where we go back into rapport. We're still in that first step where we're still out of rapport. All right, so that is the two-step process. And here's an important thing. As we're coming up to the needs conflict and the values conflict, it's really important that you continue to utilize both those skills. Now, some people have a hard time understanding how to deliver a iMessage straight away. So one of the things that we recommend that instead of delivering and practicing delivering iMessages that are negative, we work on positive iMessages instead. And positive iMessages are basically the same fundamental thing. We're going to follow exactly the same formula, except for we're talking about something positive. All right, let's see what that looks like. So when the sensory specific behavior occurs or happens, I feel bah, and the result for me is bah, whatever that is. All right, let's look at a couple of examples. When someone follows the customer out the door to give them back their sweater, I feel honored to work with that person. So that's really a good iMessage. That iMessage, the other person can't argue with you about the fact that they've done something good, because it wasn't about them, it was about the behavior, and you're rewarding a specific behavior. And you're telling them how you feel, and they can't argue with that either. Sometimes people have a hard time taking compliments. So this is a really good way to compliment people without having them argue with you about it. You know, some people I know, you say, wow, that's a really pretty dress. And they go, no, it's not. I've had this forever and I really hate it. And they'll talk like that about it instead of accepting whatever praise it was that you were giving. So you have to kind of format it into an iMessage, and it comes across much better. When the dishes are done in the morning when I get out of bed, I feel relieved. I can start early on my workout and I have more time to do my work. So this is a iMessage that's really easy to deliver because, again, it's about the sensory specific behavior. We didn't just say, hey, thanks for doing the dishes. We told them this is the behavior and the result for me is this, and I feel this way because this happened. And that's really, really important. In management, this is key. As a manager, you should be, as they say in the management surveys and things like that, that managers should be giving 6 to 7 pieces of praise for every one correction that they do. So that would mean 6 to 7 positive iMessages per staff member than to 1 negative iMessage or regular iMessage that we're delivering to our staff members. So that's quite a big difference, 6 or 7 to 1. So if you're uncomfortable delivering iMessages to people, especially getting that sensory specific thing right, start with positive iMessages. And always, again, focus on not exaggerating it, but focus on keeping it sensory specific, keeping it neutral, and keeping it very specific to what the behavior was and how you feel about it. So, all right. We have 2 more sessions coming up about conflict management and needs conflict as well as values conflict. So November 19th and December 8th. So we hope that you'll join us live for these events because, of course, you missed all of the practice and you missed all of the demonstrations and you missed all the questions and answers afterwards. So in our session, most people during the live session had an issue with that entire sensory specific thing. It was really difficult for people to practice and get around that sensory specific behavior. So that's the key. I would highly recommend everybody practicing that. And so until the next video or the next live session, we'll see you then.